J.M. Another story from the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 7. Proposal. I see. Did your father disapprove? When I told the professor about not getting permission for further studies from my father, he sighed heavily. It was the usual research room. His figure sinking into the comfortable chair looked unusually lonely. If it's not too much trouble, could you tell me? When I said that much, the professor glared at me from deep-set eyes. About your relationship with your father. I managed to continue speaking. The professor's gaze was intimidating, but I couldn't help but ask. Even if asking personal questions to someone superior was considered rude, I didn't have the luxury of adhering to such social norms. Besides, I thought I had become quite close to the professor through our previous meetings. Humph. The professor snorted. Did you think my relationship with your father would hinder your further studies? If so, that's an assumption. Even if your father harbors animosity towards me, it's nonsense to think that the feelings of just one person could obstruct your university education. Rest assured. The relationship between your father and me is not like that. Your father must have his own thoughts. That aside, if your father's consent cannot be obtained, we'll have to consider other options. The professor crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and appeared to be pondering for a moment. Wasn't the father's opposition an expected development for the professor from the start? His somewhat theatrical gestures made me suspect so. What if we did this? Eventually, when he opened his eyes, the professor said, I'll cover the expenses for your further studies and living expenses during your enrollment. Huh. I couldn't believe the favorable conditions suddenly presented to me. Even if I was naive, I couldn't help but suspect if there was a catch. Even if there were any reasons for the professor to support me, however strong, there was still a nagging suspicion. You can consider it as compensation for serving as my assistant. I won't ask you to pay it back later. The professor shrugged casually, as if it were not a big deal. For me, there was no dependency on working as an assistant. No, serving as the professor's assistant would be more valuable than academic achievements at the university. I would rather welcome it. What troubled me was my father's opposition. Behind his unwavering attitude, there must be reasons that he couldn't disclose to others. Even if the money was secured, did it make sense to pursue further studies at Oxford at the expense of pushing through it? I was conflicted between my father and the professor. However, despite the concerns about my father's inexplicable behavior, my mind was already made up. There was something more appealing to me than the name of the university. Becoming the professor's assistant meant, in essence, that my relationship with Cheryl would continue.